A man saved a lion, and what happened next still moves many people. The rifle trembled in Marcus's hands when he saw the lion's eyes for the first time. It wasn't the tremor of fear, but something much deeper. The recognition of one wounded soul looking at another. It was March 2018, and the 34-year-old park ranger had received the most difficult order of his career: to eliminate a male lion that had been attacking livestock on the outskirts of Kruger National Park in South Africa. But when Marcus got close enough to have a clean shot, what he saw changed him forever. The lion, whom he would later call friend, wasn't the fierce predator he expected to find. It was a malnourished animal with an obviously fractured hind leg, desperately dragging itself in search of food. His ribs protruded under his golden coat, and in his eyes Marcus saw something he immediately recognized: the desperation of someone fighting to survive against all odds. Marcus slowly lowered his rifle. In that moment, he made a decision that would not only challenge his training and protocol, but would also take him down a path he never imagined walking. "I can't do it," he whispered to himself as he watched the lion try to stand. "Not to you." Marcus's decision wasn't impulsive. He had grown up in a small village near the park, where conflicts between humans and wildlife were a daily reality. His father, also a park ranger, had taught him from a young age that sometimes the most difficult decisions are the ones that define who we really are. But Marcus also carried a personal burden. 2 years ago, he had lost his younger brother in a car accident, and since then, he had been fighting against a depression that threatened to consume him. Instead of shooting, Marcus cautiously approached the wounded lion. Friend growled weakly but didn't have the strength to attack. It was evident that the animal had been suffering for weeks, possibly months. The fracture in his leg had healed poorly, leaving him permanently lame and unable to hunt efficiently. This had forced him to seek easier prey, like domestic livestock, which had led local farmers to demand his elimination. Marcus knew that what he was about to do could cost him his job, but something in Friend's eyes reminded him of his own internal struggle. He decided to try something he had never done before: rehabilitate an adult wild lion. During the following weeks, Marcus secretly visited Friend every day after his shift. He brought fresh meat and water, always keeping a safe distance. At first, the lion was distrustful and aggressive, but gradually began to associate Marcus's presence with food and safety. Marcus documented everything in a personal diary, recording each small progress and each setback. "Day 12, he wrote in his diary. "The friend no longer growls when I approach. Today I was able to examine his paw up close. The fracture has healed, but the limp will be permanent. However, his general condition is improving. He's gaining weight and his coat is beginning to look healthier. But what's most notable is the change in his eyes. I no longer see that blind desperation. There's something like hope." As the days passed, Marcus realized that caring for Friend was having an unexpected effect on him. The daily routine of visiting the lion, the responsibility of caring for another living being, and the small moments of connection they began to develop were helping him emerge from his own emotional darkness. For the first time since his brother's death, Marcus had a purpose that went beyond his routine work. However, keeping this secret was becoming increasingly difficult. His colleagues began to notice changes in his behavior. Marcus had stopped socializing after work and seemed constantly worried. His supervisor, veteran park ranger David Mathembu, began to suspect that something was wrong. "Marcus," David said to him one afternoon after Marcus arrived late to work for the 3rd time that week, "is there something you need to tell me? You've been acting strange lately." Marcus struggled with the temptation to confess everything. David had been like a father to him since he started working at the park 8 years ago. But he also knew that David would have to report the situation, and that would mean the end for Friend. "I'm fine," Marcus lied. "I've just had some personal problems." But David knew Marcus too well. That night, he decided to discreetly follow him when Marcus left the camp after his shift. What David saw left him speechless. There was Marcus, sitting just a few meters from an adult lion, speaking to him softly while the animal ate the meat he had brought. The scene was both beautiful and terrifying. David had worked with wildlife for more than 30 years, but had never seen anything like this. If you need more stories like this that inspire you and make you reflect on the connection between humans and animals, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive new content every week. David waited until Marcus left before approaching to examine the area. The tracks on the ground confirmed his suspicions. Marcus had been coming here regularly for weeks. The next day, he confronted Marcus privately. "You need to explain to me what's going on," David said, closing the door to his office. "And don't come to me with lies about personal problems." Marcus felt his stomach sink. He knew he couldn't keep lying to David, but he also couldn't bear the idea of betraying friend. After several minutes of tense silence, Marcus finally told the whole story. David listened in silence, his expression changing from disbelief to concern, and finally to something like understanding. When Marcus finished, David sighed deeply. "Marcus, do you have any idea how dangerous what you've been doing is, and the legal implications if someone else finds out?" "I know," Marcus interrupted, "but David, you had to see him. He was dying, and now he's better, stronger, happy even." "That's not the point," David replied, though his voice had lost some of its harshness. "You can't just unilaterally decide to rehabilitate a wild lion. There are protocols, permits, adequate facilities." "So what do you suggest?" Marcus asked. "That I go now and kill him. And after all this time?" David remained quiet for a long moment, looking out the window toward the vast landscape of the park. Finally he spoke. "There's someone you need to meet. Dr. Sarah Komninos. She's a veterinarian specializing in big cats who works with a wildlife sanctuary near Cape Town. If anyone can help you do this right, it's her." The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Marcus. David had discreetly contacted Dr. Komninos, explaining the situation without mentioning specific names or exact locations. To Marcus's surprise, the veterinarian not only showed interest, but expressed her desire to personally evaluate the lion. "It's highly irregular," Dr. Komninos had said over the phone, "but if what you're telling me is true, if you've really managed to establish this type of bond with an adult wild lion, then we have to explore it. It could be revolutionary for our understanding of big cat rehabilitation." Dr. Komninos' arrival marked a turning point in the story of Marcus and friend. She was a petite woman of about 50, with grey hair and intense eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate everything around her. She had dedicated her life to working with big cats, both in captivity and in the wild, and had an international reputation for her innovative rehabilitation techniques. When she first saw the interaction between Marcus and friend, Dr. Komninos remained silent for several minutes, taking mental notes of every detail. She observed how friend voluntarily approached Marcus, how he responded to his voice, and the complete absence of aggression or fear in his behavior. "In my 30 years working with big cats," she finally murmured, "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if you've developed a common language." The veterinary evaluation of friend revealed that, in addition to the permanent limp, he had several old scars that suggested a difficult life before meeting Marcus. However, his current physical condition was surprisingly good, especially considering his initial state. "The limp means he can never fully return to wildlife," Dr. Komninos explained to Marcus and David. "He couldn't survive on his own or compete with other lions for territory and mates. But that doesn't mean his life is over." The doctor proposed a solution that Marcus had never considered, moving Friend to a specialized sanctuary where he could live a dignified and safe life, also contributing to education and conservation programs. But there was one condition. Marcus would have to accompany Friend during the transition to minimize the trauma of change. "I'm not sure I can do that," Marcus said, struggling with conflicting emotions. "My job is here. My life is here." "Marcus," Dr. Komnenos said softly, "what you've achieved with Friend is extraordinary. You've demonstrated a natural talent for working with big cats that can't be taught in any university. The sanctuary needs people like you, and frankly, I think you need this too." That night, Marcus stayed awake for hours, reflecting on the proposal. Part of him felt terrified at the idea of leaving everything familiar and moving hundreds of kilometers away, but another part, a part that had been dormant since his brother's death, felt excited about the possibility of a new beginning. The final decision came during one of his nighttime visits to Friend. As he watched the lion resting peacefully under the stars, Marcus felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that his connection with Friend had been much more than simple animal rehabilitation. It had been his own rehabilitation. "You know what, Friend?" he told Friend, who raised his head upon hearing his voice. "And I think we both deserve a second chance." 3 weeks later, Marcus and Friend embarked on the 1,200-kilometer journey to the African Wildlife Sanctuary near Cape Town. Transporting Friend required careful coordination and special permits, but Dr. Komnenos' reputation opened doors that would otherwise have remained closed. The departure day was emotional for everyone involved. David, who had initially been skeptical about the entire situation, now showed pride in Marcus and his decision. "Your father would be proud," he told Marcus as they loaded Friend into the specialized transport vehicle. "You've found your way." The journey was long but uneventful. Friend, sedated for transport, woke up in his new home, a vast 10-hectare enclosure with natural vegetation, water holes, and shelters built specifically for rehabilitated big cats. But most important for Marcus was that he would be there to help Friend adapt. The first days at the sanctuary were challenging. Friend was nervous in his new environment, and Marcus feared he had made a terrible mistake. But gradually, both the lion and his human caregiver began to adapt. Marcus worked closely with the sanctuary team, learning new animal care techniques and contributing his unique experience. The moment of true revelation came 6 months after their arrival at the sanctuary. Marcus was giving an educational talk to a group of university students when one of them asked him what he had learned from his experience with Friend. Marcus looked toward the enclosure where Friend was resting under the shade of an acacia tree, his coat shining under the African sun. The lion had gained weight. His limp was barely perceptible when he walked slowly, and in his eyes there was a peace that Marcus recognized because he felt it in himself. "I learned that sometimes when we save someone else, we're actually saving ourselves," Marcus replied. "Friend was broken when I found him, but I was broken too. By caring for him, by giving him a second chance, I realized I was also giving myself a second chance." The student, intrigued, asked, "But wasn't it dangerous? Didn't you feel fear?" Marcus smiled, remembering those first days when he approached the wounded lion with his heart beating 1,000 times per hour. "Of course I was afraid, but there's something I learned. Fear is not the opposite of courage. Courage is feeling fear and acting anyway when you know it's the right thing to do." After the talk, Marcus headed to Friend's enclosure for his evening routine. Unlike those first days in Kruger, now Friend approached him immediately, rubbing his massive head against the fence affectionately. It was a ritual they had developed, a silent form of communication that transcended barriers between species. "How are you today, old friend?" Marcus murmured, extending his hand to gently touch Friend's head through the fence. The lion closed his eyes and purred, a deep and comforting sound that always filled Marcus with a sense of deep peace. That night, Marcus wrote in his diary, a practice he had maintained since those first days with Friend. "It's been 8 months since we brought Friend here. Today, I realized something important. I no longer feel that constant heaviness in my chest that accompanied me for 2 years after James's death. It's not that I've forgotten my brother, I never will, but I've learned that honoring his memory doesn't mean living in constant pain. It means living fully, with purpose, helping others when I can. Friend taught me that. He taught me that even when we're broken, even when we seem to be at the end of the road, there's always the possibility of healing if we have someone who believes in us. I believed in Friend when no one else did, and he, without knowing it, gave me a reason to believe in myself again." The story of Marcus and Friend began to gain attention beyond the sanctuary. Local journalists, attracted by the unusual tale of connection between human and lion, began visiting the sanctuary. International documentarians expressed interest in filming their story. But for Marcus, all the media attention was secondary to the real impact his experience was having. He had begun to develop new rehabilitation protocols based on his experience with Friend, techniques that emphasized building trust and emotional connection in addition to traditional medical care. Other sanctuaries began inviting him to share his methods, and universities asked him to give lectures on big cat behavior. But the most significant moment came when he received a letter from a young park ranger from Kenya who had read about his story in a conservation magazine. "Dear Marcus," the letter said, "my name is Joseph, and I work at a reserve in Kenya. I recently found myself in a situation similar to yours, an injured leopard that's causing problems for local communities. After reading your story, I decided to try your approach instead of simply eliminating it. I wanted to thank you for showing me that there are other options. Your story has inspired me to think differently about my work and my purpose." Marcus read the letter several times, feeling a mixture of pride and responsibility. He realized that his impulsive decision to save a wounded lion had had ripple effects that reached much further than he ever imagined. 2 years after arriving at the sanctuary, Marcus had been promoted to Director of Big Cat Rehabilitation. He had helped establish similar programs in other African countries and had co-written a manual on feline rehabilitation that had become a standard reference in the field. But for him, none of that compared to the quiet moments he still shared with Friend every afternoon. The lion, now 8 years old, had developed a peaceful routine at the sanctuary. He had formed social bonds with other rescued felines, participated in educational programs from a safe distance, and seemed to live with a tranquility that Marcus envied. On the 2nd anniversary of their arrival at the sanctuary, Marcus organized a small celebration. It wasn't typical to celebrate the arrival date of a rescued animal, but Friend's story had touched the hearts of all the sanctuary staff. During the small ceremony, Dr. Komninos gave a speech about the impact that Marcus and Friend had had on the conservation field. When Marcus first told me about Friend," she said, addressing the small gathered group, "I thought it was a nice but isolated story. I didn't realize I was witnessing the birth of a new conservation philosophy, one that recognizes that saving animals and saving people often go hand in hand." After the ceremony, Marcus found himself alone with Friend for the last time that day. The lion, now completely grey around the muzzle but still imposing, approached the fence as he always did. Marcus extended his hand, and Friend pressed his head against it. "You know what, Friend?" Marcus told him, using the same words he had said that night under the stars in Kruger. "I think we both found what we were looking for." In the years that followed, the story of Marcus and Friend became more than an anecdote about conservation. It became a symbol of hope for people facing their own struggles. Marcus regularly received letters from people who had found inspiration in his story. Veterans fighting PTSD who had found purpose caring for rescued animals. People in addiction recovery who had discovered strength in helping others. Individuals facing devastating losses who had found healing in acts of compassion. One letter in particular stayed with Marcus for a long time. It was from a middle-aged woman from South Africa who had lost her son in an accident. "Dear Marcus," she wrote, "I lost my son 3 years ago and had lost all hope. Your story about friend helped me understand that sometimes, when we feel we can't keep living for ourselves, we can find a reason to live by helping others. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and for the first time since my son's death, I feel my life has purpose again." Marcus kept that letter on his desk, next to a photo of him and friend taken during their first days at the sanctuary. In the image, both man and lion seemed cautious, unsure of what the future held for them. Now, years later, Marcus could see the transformation not only in friend's physical condition, but in both their eyes. The story continues to this day. Friend, now 10 years old, remains a beloved resident of the sanctuary. His health is good, considering his age and history of injuries, and he continues to participate in educational programs that have inspired thousands of visitors. Marcus, for his part, has established a foundation dedicated to big cat rehabilitation and has trained dozens of caregivers in his innovative techniques. But beyond all the professional achievements and international recognition, Marcus knows that his greatest triumph was much more personal. It was finding a way to transform his own pain into something constructive, his loss into compassion, and his desperation into hope. On quiet nights, when the sanctuary falls silent except for the natural sounds of African wildlife, Marcus often reflects on that day in Kruger when he made the decision that changed everything. He wonders what would have happened if he had followed orders, if he had pulled the trigger as he was supposed to do. But then he looks toward the enclosure where friend rests peacefully under the stars and knows he made the right decision. He didn't just save a lion's life. He discovered that by saving friend, he had found a way to save himself. The story of Marcus and friend reminds us that the most significant acts of compassion often arise from our darkest moments. It teaches us that true healing occurs when we extend our hand to another being who needs help, when we choose hope over despair, when we decide that life is worth fighting for, even when it seems all odds are against us. And perhaps, most importantly, it shows us that the deepest bonds transcend species, that compassion is a universal language, and that sometimes, when we least expect it, we find exactly what we needed in the eyes of another being who is also struggling to find their way to the light. Controlees do chat Sonnet 4.